Good evening. Welcome to the May 2nd, is it May already? May 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, the public hearings, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be via the Zoom raise hand feature. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. And as one or more board members are participating remotely, every vote will be taken by roll call. And please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Television Government Channel. And with that, we'll begin the meeting with a roll call of the members. Justin Wood.
Present.
Bob Hassinger.
I'm here.
Linda Hassinger.
Here.
Prabhu Venkatraman.
Here.
Dave Robbins is here, and Associate Member Maura McCormack.
Present.
Staff here with us is Christopher McGoldrick, Town Planner.
Present.
And Natalia Allward, Office Manager.
Present.
As we begin our agenda tonight, the first agenda item is public input. If there is any member of the public here who wishes to speak on a matter that is not already on the agenda for tonight's meeting, now would be the time to raise your hand and ask your question or make your comment. Seeing no raised hands in the audience and no raised hands on Zoom, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is action item A, the draft decision on the request for special permit and site plan approval at 37 Magnolia Lane. So we have a draft decision before us.
We do.
This is in the usual format for a special permit decision for an accessory apartment with all the usual conditions and findings. So, any board member have anything to discuss relative to the decision? Any findings that need to be reworded or modified or added? Any conditions that need to be reworded, modified, or added?
Solid,
any
solid,
other
very
comment?
standard for our usual one.
Yes, these are pretty routine.
I move that we find favorably on this decision, including all findings, all waivers, and all conditions as drafted with any discussion, any changes during discussion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll put it to a vote. Justin.
Aye.
Bob.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Prabhu.
Aye.
And Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. Staff will complete the paperwork and file it accordingly. With that done, we'll move on to discussion items. Our first discussion item is 11 Wheeler Road. We have an update on that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to provide a brief update. As things are developing, I do have. I'll start with some kind of items that will be coming before the board. So I was on the phone this morning with the applicant, and they mentioned that there is some difficulties in acquiring granite curbing for this project, at least for the time being, given kind of construction supply schedules and the current conditions that I'm sure we're all aware of in terms of building materials. So there is likely to be a request for a determination of minor modification to temporarily allow Cape Cod berms in order to allow the lot releases of the buildings, understanding that the granite curbing would then be installed at a later time once that kind of construction schedule can be resolved. So that'll be coming before the board. We don't have to discuss it tonight, but that was kind of the direction that we were looking at.
Would that be bef- would that change come before or after the first layer of paving? The base-
I believe that would be. I didn't discuss that with the applicant. I would imagine it would be the binder coat, and then that would be prior to the top coat that the granite
Yeah,
curbing would be
Cape Cod
installed.
berm is typically placed on top of the first lower layer, if I'm remembering correctly.
The problem is, I'm thinking it may be a problem. You have to dig down so you to put the granite in. So you have a break in the binder layer. You create a break in the binder layer so that it hasn't been up against, solidly up against the curb. I think we may want to understand about that.
Yeah, the details of how it will work. I mean, it's not uncommon for curbing to either be Cape Cod berm or granite, but it's somewhat an unusual situation for Cape Cod berm being used as a temporary curbing. So yeah, I think to Bob's point, we want to be clear on understand what that all involves and whether there are any unique problems or potential problems associated with that approach.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, that's for whenever that comes back to us.
we'll see what the applicant provides for application and materials for that. But and then I'll be happy to run that by Graves Engineer for their comment as well, because they'll know more than I would in terms of the specific engineering.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it may or may not be an issue, but
Yeah, I think it's our responsibility to make sure the road gets built as well as possible.
I mean, the final configuration, the granite curbing should be installed and it should, in all respects, it should function as though it had been installed initially.
Yeah, and that boils down to the paving in this particular issue.
Yeah.
How the paving meets and joins with the curbing, the final curbing. I think Chris's head suggests that he understands what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yep.
Now,
Yes.
I'll just add, at least for me, Chris, I think understanding a comment from Graves, if this minor modification comes before me, would be very beneficial to make a determination on it. So we'll want to get that, at least for myself, I want to get that comment in, without having to have MEX minor modifications don't always
Makes sense.
take that longer period of time.
And other than that, anything else?
Yep. So, other than that, I did conduct a pre-construction site walk, looking at the site just this last Wednesday. Graves Engineering was on that site walk as well. So we did look through. We did not identify any heritage trees. In fact, the location where the houses are going and where the road is going, was cleared long before this project. It's actually there's not as many trees as you may think that are coming down. So it's actually going to be a fairly low impact project, which is good to see. And the applicant did, we identified some trees that were along the limit of work that they're in agreement can stay because they've actually made the site a little bit more compact with the placement of the houses. We did take a look at, so in addition, we will be seeing a covenant that's been prepared that'll be coming in for the board's review and approval as well. So they can do the limited site clearing, but in terms of any of the road work, we'll have to have that provided to us. And then in terms of that site walk, we also did take a look at the trail with Graves Engineering, specifically looking at, from our discussion at the last meeting, the utility pipe that would be provided there. Obviously, a site walk is just a site walk. Graves said that they would like to take a look at the hydrocalcs again to see what kind of impact that pipe would have on the existing conditions and what that would look like. So I think those calculations will provide us a little bit more information. Is this, a significant impact, or even though it's an 18-inch pipe, sometimes it's a fairly slow trickle. It's more of an overflow, from my understanding, that protection of overflow from the basin. So as it fills, if it reaches a certain amount, then it'll discharge. But again, we'll have Graves give us a little bit more insight into that. So that's under review. I haven't had a chance to speak to town council yet about the possibility for an easement on the Grafton Land Trust land, so I'm hoping to have that conversation most likely on Wednesday. And I'll be able to follow up on that as well. So, ongoing discussion, but I just wanted to give that update to the board.
Come on up.
I'll wait till the chair recognizes
Yeah.
me. It's Rob.
Now, is there a conservation implication here if they're changing that?
Yeah, so Conservation Commission is currently reviewing an application. I'm not intimately aware of the details of that. I can get somewhat of a review from the conservation agent if that's something that we want to look at more closely. But that's under their purview, and they are reviewing that. My understanding is it's continued until their next meeting, which I believe is I'm going to have the wrong date, 15th?
It'd be interesting to see what's going on, what that is.
Yeah, it's not on their agenda for tomorrow.
They canceled.
Oh,
It's canceled. Yep.
so it must have been the following then. But yeah, they continued that meeting for quite some time. My understanding is Norm Hill is doing some additional look at it. So
Yeah. Hi, Rob Aberg,
Yeah.
43 South Street. Yeah, we're paying Norm Hill like $10,000 to do some of this work. So we're very keen to not have changes because changes are expensive. We'd like that to be resolved before we put in, because right now we have to raise the trail 25 inches above grade to handle the runoff, according to Norm's calculations, based on the calculations from the runoff. And I would not say it's correct to say that that pipe is for overflow at all. If you look at the layout, the pipe is for draining the basin, and there's an overflow weir about 40 feet to the west, I think it is. It's farther down the trail. There's an overflow weir that's a separate place that needs a separate pipe. So we're trying to control costs there because we're a charity, and this is looking like it's going to be 2 times our annual operating budget to handle this. So the $13,000 is much appreciated, but it's a drop in the bucket the way this is going. So I also noted on my site visit yesterday that some barriers have been placed on land trust property on the far side of the trail, and nobody's contacted the land trust to request permission to work on land trust property. So if we could remind applicant to contact the land trust and get permission before doing construction activities, I'm sure we'll say yes for things like, silt barriers and stuff like that. But I don't want it to be a blanket approval because you never know well, they're okay with it. So no, we're not. We want to review it and then give permission for specific items one at a time. If you'll remember, the reason this came up in the first place was because after the car crashes, the gullies that formed when the berm was removed caused silting in the river, and we had a DEP complaint against the land trust for silting the river from some other action. So we're very sensitive to riverfront activity that could cause us to get sued by the state for somebody else's action. So we don't have a lot of money, and we're very sensitive to it.
Yeah, I think this speaks to the need to make sure that everybody's working together on this.
yep, I'll have them reach out.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, because me no more than anybody else wants to see any unnecessary effort expended, or anybody working at cross purposes here, or the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. Yeah.
Well, since the project is looking to change things in a way that may cost the land trust more money, I think there's some revisiting to be done there as to who contributes what.
And I would ask that, I don't want to be a reason for a delay, but if you could include me on site visits, I may have additional adjacent information that I could use to help. So again, you don't have to like set your schedule by my availability, but let me know when you guys are visiting. I'm happy to come out and share anything I know.
Yeah, I think that would be entirely appropriate to make sure that everybody's working together on this.
Thank you.
And since the land trust is, yeah, almost a direct participant in the project, as indeed you've been involved in certain aspects of this, of the land swap and all that, you deserve to be kept in the loop as much as everybody else does.
Chris, did you guys note how far away that the limit of work was for the basin now? It would have been about 8 feet from that sign we have in the woods, the big mural thing with the maps on it. And now it's way back there. So I think the land swap worked. That looked really promising. If you're back there, you can see they have a big plastic fence up now.
Yep.
Right, anything else on 11 Wheeler?
That was it.
Keep the work going and make sure everybody's kept in the loop.
Absolutely.
And it will, anything that needs to come back to this board will come back, and we'll deal with it as expeditiously as we can. I think, given the discussion tonight, I think you got a good sense of, what the board's going to need to see whenever it does come back. And meanwhile, before it comes back to us, again, just to emphasize, make sure everybody's working together on this and ends up on the same page.
Will do. Thanks.
Is that it?
Yep.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, Bob, Linda, Prabhu. Waving at the monitor.
Yeah.
Rob's waving at the screen, which of course Bob can't see. Yeah, see now if all these screens had little cameras in them.
Yeah.
Okay, our next agenda item is the master plan update. So the master plan update is going to be before the select board tomorrow evening.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, I issued the letter. I attached the proposal that we received from CMRPC. I'm anticipating giving a brief kind of presentation on that and see where the select board wants to go in regards to that item.
I will be attending the meeting also for a variety of reasons, but the master plan being one of them. I'd be more than happy to put my 2 cents in to the select board and about my thoughts about proceeding with the master plan.
Yep.
And of course, anybody else from the board is welcome to attend as well.
Yep.
And as I noted at anything else about the select board tomorrow?
No,
I mean,
that's all I have.
hopefully the outcome of that will be that we'll be able to proceed as rapidly as possible to get the thing organized and on the road.
Yep.
As I noted at the last meeting, just last week, I had completed my review of the recommendations. That's the word I was looking for from the 20-year-old master plan. I've just sent that in to Chris and Natalia to be put up on the website for we'll start accumulating materials for the new master plan update on the planning board's website. I did have one thing. I had mentioned it before. I thought since we seem to have some time tonight, I'd like to share this with the board. The review I've done so far of how housing has grown in Grafton, and I didn't have a chance to send it into you ahead of time. But if you could enable me to share my screen, I can just sort of quickly run through what I've come up with so far, which hopefully will be ultimately of some interest as we work through the master plan now. I can just find it. There it is. There we go. So what I've done is basically, well, title slide is uninteresting. So I've basically taken from the assessors data, the latest I can get from MassGIS, which is for fiscal year 21, along with some additional information gleaned from the property record cards on Grafton GIS, to talk about housing as it exists today with the historical data based upon when the housing was built. So for anything that exists today, they've got the assessor data includes the year it was built, and it gives us a pretty good picture for how housing has developed in Grafton over the years. Obviously, housing that once existed but no longer exists, it would take a lot more digging to dig up data on that, and that's probably not very interesting. Also to note that based on how houses are, what's there today, changes in use. There are a few single-family homes that appear to have been converted into condos and other or apartments. So that again is not easy to get from the current data. But regardless, with those caveats, here's a look at how housing has grown from the very beginning. The oldest house on record that still exists was built in 1706. But what's interesting to observe here are the changes that have taken place. Sort of the first kind of notable bump up in housing was around 1920, when hundreds of housing units were built for mill workers. But perhaps more interesting is that starting around 1950, the rate of growth of housing in Grafton grew significantly to the point where of all the housing units that exist today, 78% of them were built after 1950. And within that period, there was a 20-year period where almost half of all the housing units that were built since 1950 were built between 85 and 2006. That was the big boom in housing development in Grafton. So this kind of a long-term view kind of shows you that the most interesting period to look at more closely starts in 1950. Also interesting is to observe the difference in growth between population and housing units. Just the readily information I was able to pick, the population. I got the census numbers here from the UMass Donahue Institute. They had going back to 1930. Again, we can go back farther if we want to do more digging, but this is the data I could easily obtain. But the interesting observation here is that starting around 1960, which is the tail end of the baby boom, housing starts to grow at a faster rate than population does. That's just sort of an interesting observation, but there's a change in the number of people per housing unit. In the 30s and 40s, there were four or five people per housing unit, and nowadays there's maybe 2.5 people per housing unit. It reflects a lot of the change in demographics, which a deeper analysis of census information could tell you a lot more. And we may get into some of that as we get into the development of the master plan, sort of a review of how the demographics have changed. So from 1950 up through 2020, which is the latest full year that I've got data for, this graph shows kind of the proportion, how much of the housing is single family, how much of it's condo, how much of it's multifamily. And of course, it's fairly obvious by looking at this that the majority of the growth here has been in single family homes. Specifically, over this period of time, 65% of all the growth was in single family homes, and another 22% of that is in condos, which basically came into town in the early 80s and then just kind of took off from there until about 2006, when the growth rate sort of leveled off a bit. And 12% of the growth in this period is multifamily units, mainly apartments, and 2% of the growth is in 2 or 3 family units. So you can see the predominant growth has been in single family homes. Bob, I see your hand.
Yeah, maybe you'll get to it, and probably it's hard to do, but I'm really curious about what fraction of this over the years is 40Bs.
I didn't include that that's something I have yet to add to this presentation, but I just the other day I was digging up those numbers. And I can tell you off the top of my head, the total number of units developed in 40Bs is somewhere, it's between 400 and 500. I forget the exact number off the top of my head. But in terms of overall, that's out of, we now have, the data here is represents a total of 7,700 housing units. But it would be interesting to graph out the 40B share of that, which I'll make a note to add that. So looking at it another way, just looking at the housing production per year, that's what this chart shows. And it shows with the orange bars are multifamily, and shows that multifamily production started increasing considerably around 1970. Never very high in comparison to some of the others, but there's relatively little multifamily before that. Condos arrived in the early 80s, and starting around 1986 is when we began to see major condo development that lasted through around 2006. Single-family home construction kind of fell off a cliff after 2005. Since 2005, 2006, the pace of housing production is pretty low, substantially affected by the 2008 recession. So, next few pages are just maps showing you where the new housing was built in different time periods. Looking at it from 1880 to 1949, these kind of it's hard to read these in any detail on the screen, of course, and I can make a more readable map available in documents that we'll post. But the predominant housing development in this period of time was in the mill villages, the South Grafton Mill villages and up around New England Village and Washington Mills in that area. Then the first post-war period, 50 through 70, is when we had to start building housing for the parents of the baby boomers. And indeed, the first of those subdivisions, the purple areas are, in fact, most of what you see here are single-family home subdivisions. But the first of those that was built was across the street from Wyman Gordon. So a lot of homes were built right around there, the Hollywood Gardens area, the Airport Road area, and a few other areas. And this is basically where people of my parents' generation started living after World War II. Moving on, we see sort of the next period. This is when the baby boomers started moving into their own houses, and we saw somewhat more scattered subdivision development around town during this period up through 1984, and then the big housing boom hit. And here's where we got a lot of major subdivisions, large subdivisions, mostly in the more rural areas of town, along with all the big condo developments, which kind of show up in the green areas on the map. Those are all the big condo developments we've seen in town. Subsequent to that, there have been a few more small ones, but this is where an awful lot of building happened during these 20 years. And then since 2007, there's been relatively little development. There's some, but it's kind of scattered around again. It's just sort of not as obvious as the previous 20-year period. And finally, just a map of the housing developments that are currently underway, approved, and in most cases construction has begun. About 3 or 4 subdivisions, a couple of apartment complexes. Half of the housing here. There's a total of 558 units in this map. Over half of them are at 8 Pine Street. It's just a little green area at the top of the map, but that's where over half of the housing currently under development is right there. And as I said before, I haven't included a map or data on the 40Bs yet, but that's something I want to add to this. But this just kind of gives you a sense of where and how much housing has been built over the years. It's kind of interesting to see. And then the last couple of slides I have are some trends in single-family home development. This first chart is the the trends in average living area and average lot size. And you can see the blue line is the average living area, and that's just been sloping constantly upwards ever since 1950. The green bars are the average lot sizes, which in the 50s were mostly around half an acre, and then starting around the 60s, they tended to go more closer to 1 acre lots. And it's been, there's no obvious trend here in lot sizes, which I was a little bit surprised to see that. I kind of intuitively expected that lot size trends were going up the same way the living area trends were, but that turns out not to be the case. Perhaps more interesting is the mix of living area sizes. What percentage of homes have been built with different sizes? And the notable trend here is that since 2001, we're really all about building big houses. 2/3 of the houses built since 2001 are 2,500 square feet or more, with over 1/3 of them being 3,000 square feet or over. So that's where the market is these days in the context of the zoning that Grafton makes available. It's all about big houses. And of course, the assessed values tend to follow that same trend. Since 2001, 79% of the homes built have an assessed value of over 500,000, 30% between 500 and 600, 32% between 600 and 700, and 17%, and I suspect growing, are $700,000 and up. So these are, and that's really what that's it so far what I've developed in this. But I think the trends are perhaps noteworthy and perhaps somewhat of a matter for concern in terms of thinking about where we would like to see housing development directed in the future. And that's going to be one of the topics that we're going to be discussing as we get into the master plan development is here's where we are, here's where we've been, here's how we got there, and where do we want to go from here? And what can we do to make it happen that way, whatever way that turns out to be. And there's room for a lot of discussion on that. So just very briefly, that's what I've come up with so far. I'm sure there's more we can do with this, and more use we can make of it, or some whatever. I just thought I'd share that with the board tonight as a matter of interest. I see Justin's hand and Bob's hand.
So, yeah, on the assessed value, just two thoughts in my head is, number one, I'm certain that is assessed value today of each of those
Yes.
lots, as because in theory, an assessed value of a 50-year-old house, even if it is the same size, is going to be lower than an assessed value of a new built house of that same size.
These are assessed values relative to the year the house was built. All right. As today's assessed values, and the graph is today's assessed value based on the year the house was built.
Yeah. The interesting piece to me that might just be a curious piece of data that's probably easy to figure out with what you presented is what's the assessed value per square foot over the years, per square foot of the house. That might present interesting. It might be totally not useful. It's just a curious thought I have.
Yeah, that would be easy enough to calculate. And as with some of the other data I looked at with this, there's a lot of different things that I can calculate. I calculated a number of other things too, and some of the other things I calculated they didn't seem to be of any. They didn't seem to tell me anything.
Yeah.
And that's another one. I hadn't thought of that one, but yeah, that might tell you something interesting, or it might not. But yeah, you never know.
That might be interesting. It might be helpful to have current dollars. In other words, if you look at an assessed value, I'm not sure how your number is going to work, but how much the dollar keeps being worth less, so the numbers keep getting bigger, and you need to be kind of aware of that. Okay, I'm curious what you use to get all that. That's very interesting. You don't have to tell us right now, but I'm very interested. I'm interested in seeing the units of affordable, quote, affordable, unquote, unquote, out of 40B. And I'll just mention, yeah, I don't think we can say anything about what people think affordable actually is. In other words, it's a lot of the
That's a
talk.
moving target.
Well, a lot of the talk we see, they're looking for numbers smaller than the 40B numbers in terms of cost. The other thing is an interesting note. Last Thursday at CMRPC, we were talking about the 20-year plan, 30-year plan that they're working on for the region, and they mentioned a new build out possibility of doing a new build out study. A few of us remember when that was done before, and there were maps and numbers for the town, how much the town could build out to. But something that one didn't cover, and I mentioned that they ought to, if they do it this time, they should do, is those studies were done based on the zoning, the existing zoning, and don't consider what growth 40B might provide beyond that. It seems to me that most of the developments that are coming by are 40Bs these days, including some pretty substantial development. So I want to have those in mind.
Yep. Yeah, interesting thoughts on a couple points you mentioned, Bob. In the 400 and some odd units, total units that I've counted under existing or in progress 40Bs. That's either ones that have been built or are currently under development. 400 and some odd total units. Of those, about 150, I think it was 151, are officially affordable, which is not the same thing as the number that count towards SHI, because SHI will include the other 75% of any development of apartments. So there's three numbers of interest here. There's a total developed under 40B, there's a number that are actually affordable, and then there's a number that count towards SHI. I've got that somewhere, and that's it's obviously subject to updating as more projects get approved, and that's part of our submission. We got in the correspondence a note regarding the current total view of our subsidized housing inventory, which also includes things that are not 40B. But you had asked Bob about where I got the data. I can briefly describe that the large part of it is downloaded from MassGIS. Among other things, MassGIS has the assessor's data. That's an assessor's record for every parcel, every condo unit. That data does not include the number of actual living units. Some of that, most of that, I was able to get. There were a few dozen properties, maybe somewhere between maybe 75 or 100, that aren't single-family homes or condo, and the assessor's data has a use code that identifies single-family homes, 2 families, 3 families, and condos. The use code tells you how many living units are there. For the others, multifamily, 4 to 8 or 8 or more. The GIS, the town GIS online has access to the property record cards. Basically, that data comes out of the vision system. Those contain a unit count, which is not always complete. And in the case of a mixed-use building where it's some commercial, some residential, it doesn't break down the units between commercial and residential. So I had to do a little bit more digging, based on those, look at the number of buildings and in some cases the building photos and comparing it with some other data to get what I believe is a pretty accurate count of the total living units, apartments, condos, single-family homes, 2 and 3 family homes, mixed-use living, the apartments that are in mixed use. I don't know that exactly matches what the census counts as a living unit. So there's, there's going to be some variation between the 7,700 number I came up with and what the census, will report. But that's basically where I got all this information from.
Did you dig down? Did you have to dig down on the town GIS into individual property cards, or does it have some way to get at?
I was only able to look at property record cards one by one.
Okay, that's what I was.
It's probable that if I wanted to pursue a more of a bulk data approach, I could have probably worked with the assessor's office to extract bulk data from them. But for the number of properties I had to look at, it was sufficient for my purposes just to view the property record cards one by one.
Yeah.
Still a lot of work.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a few hours of work.
Expanding a little bit, do we have anything else in this part of master plan? I just have a little thought or a possible thing to look at.
Yeah, I think unless there's something more on this particular topic. I mean, I've got, as I said in the previous meeting, this is kind of a work in progress. But
okay,
but
I just wanted to mention a night or two ago, going through YouTube, I stumbled across a video where a planner gave a fairly lengthy lecture on how zoning concepts vary between different areas across not just the U.S., but there's a lot of very different ways to look at zoning and what you want to accomplish with it. And it was kind of interesting also to look at where we are against that matrix and how we're moving against it. Might figure out a way, if anybody wants to see it, I might be able to find a link and send it.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be potentially interesting, because one of the topics I want us to look at, and then as we go through this master plan work, is I want us to think about, particularly in light of, if we don't like the way housing development is currently going, and we would like to try to influence it, zoning is a big part of that. And I think it would be worth our while, worth the town's while, for us to at least consider what the possibilities are for doing zoning differently in some way, shape, or form to better achieve the results that we would like to achieve.
Well, this might be interesting. I'll see how I can pass it on to everybody.
It really was interesting. It particularly dealt with zoning in Germany and I think France, and looked at it, and it's different. It's the same and different. There are similarities and there are differences.
It also traced the history of U.S. zoning, going from pyramid to
upside down pyramid.
Yeah, upside down
Inverted pyramid.
But all the different concepts. So, okay, Linda, make sure I remember.
I'll try to.
And one other observation I meant to make as I was going through it, particularly that first graph with the long-term growth in housing, was that I realized that what happened after 1950 was basically the complete transformation of Grafton from a farm and mill town into a suburban bedroom community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically, that transformation is essentially complete.
It might be interesting to see if we can capture the build out from whatever it was, 2000-ish, somehow capture that information. Somewhere there ought to be the printout that we got at the time. But anyway, whatever might be available. I would hope CMRPC someplace in the archives might still have that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to find out, to learn the details of that. You can only get so much out of reading the comprehensive plan document. It talks about the build out analysis, but not. It doesn't give the kind of detail that you would want to see in terms of looking at what was done, how was it done, what does it mean. 20 years later, did the build out? Does the actual build out kind of follow what their analysis described, or has it turned out to be rather different?
Yeah, I can probably give some inputs on some of that. But I think it was basically look at the town. They were doing, I think they ended up doing all the cities and towns, but each town, look at the zoning, look at the land characteristics like slopes, and I've forgotten, there were two or three more factors, but just the physical factors. And then given like some of this land is too steep, so we don't see that getting developed, or we only figure half as many houses as the zoning would permit, and things like that, and just crunching. Okay, you can build so many houses, in the 2 acre zoning. Okay, you got 2 acre zoning, you could develop X number of houses there based on one per every 2 acres.
Yeah.
So, but I think it might be just an interesting point to look at as we go along and we start looking at more modern looks. And anyway,
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to think about all the things that we ought to be that we need to do. This really, it kind of speaks to the amount of work that we're going to have to put into this master plan update to really do a decent job. Ultimately, I would hope that the master plan that we produce here will something that will be actually useful. It's easy to produce a plan, check the box, say, yeah, the plan has all these sections. Yeah, we'll set it aside for 20 years and maybe update it again. But to the extent that we can, I'm hoping that we can produce a plan that will be of some real value to the town. People tend to be skeptical about plans, and I think for good reason. Justin.
I will say just one thought that just came to me back on your presentation stuff. Just one thing that might be interesting to juxtapose with your graphs is student enrollment numbers in the public schools.
Yes.
Including possibly number of students at Blackstone Valley Tech for as long as it's been around, so to speak, that has been accepting Grafton students. Just to, I know you did similar like mini presentation relating to that in the past, but having those numbers, even like the preschool admissions, which are less than everyone, my gut feeling based on your past stuff is it's going to be basically very much related to the housing development and just lagging slightly behind it.
Yes, at a very high level, the study I did a couple of years ago showed that from 1990 on, and I didn't have ready access to numbers prior to that, but it would be worth exploring that farther back, that it's been a pretty consistent average of 0.4 students per living unit. Yeah, and I think that that holds today pretty much. It has held for a good 30 years. So in a sense, you can you can predict student enrollment based on a prediction of growth. However, changing demographics may influence that. I mean, it's been noted that in very recent years, student enrollment has tended to be declining even as population has gone up.
Yeah.
So changing demographics may reveal sort of a slow change in the ratio of students to housing.
And
And of course, it's always hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But
and even if we don't learn something new to us in that graph and juxtapose graph, so to speak, it's something that might be worth including in our master plan. This is this is the data we have. This is what we've seen.
yes. Up to a point, I would say that the more data that we can get, the better.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to kind of evaluate the data and what the data actually shows you to determine whether or not it's useful. But if you don't have the data, you may be missing out on something.
yeah, I'd really like to see the students in the public schools versus a per living unit going back as far as possible to see what that trend is. I thought it was closer to 0.5 than 0.4 from discussions at various school building cycles.
Yeah, I think,
but anyway, I know that it's in that ballpark. I often say 0.5.
I think it's fair to say that in the 50s and 60s, the students per living unit was quite a bit higher.
Well, that would
That-
seem likely.
That was
So-
that was, I think, in hindsight now, that was kind of an unusual period of time. Chris?
Mm.
I believe it was the school committee had a presentation and actually a report prepared that's extremely comprehensive in terms of
The NASDAQ report, yeah.
yes. So I'd be happy to share that as well.
Yeah, I know. I have a copy of the 2019 NASDAQ report. I think they got an update on that within the last year or so,
Okay.
which I haven't seen. But
Good to
the work I had done a couple of years back was based on that 2019 NASDAQ report.
Another thought I can't remember.
So we will.
Oh, I know. I'm not sure that we've talked. If we have talked about it, I've forgotten. Are we going to do more than just have the planning board adopt the plan? Are we going to ask town meeting to approve it? You can, some places do that, some places don't.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I will take a look at that and we can kind of.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which direction we're going on that.
I'll say at least that from my seat, if the last master plan we did, town meeting adopted, I would like to redo
No,
that with town
didn't.
meeting.
It didn't.
That was the problem.
I
You
couldn't
didn't.
remember.
I mean, however, along these lines of thinking, however we end up doing it procedurally, I'm hoping that we can do enough outreach on this plan that we can, in some way, shape, or form, get some sense of community buy-in on what we end up, what the plan ends up recommending. It'd be nice, and a town meeting vote to accept it is one possibility.
That's my point. If you have that book up there without town meeting action, then that's what 5 people thought at a certain point in time. If you can get a broad buy-in, presumably, most what I've heard is always a town meeting endorsement or some sort of a vote on the town meeting. Then you can say it's the town's decision,
Yeah.
or supported by the town.
Right, and that would be part of my goal of having this be a plan that's
Right.
actually useful.
Well, and used.
And used.
Yep.
You-
The
you
question
might-
does
you-
become though, what do we do if town meeting does not vote in favor of endorsing it?
Well, that requires a certain amount of review, and you also do you get town meetings vote before the planning board votes on it? Or perhaps there's something other than a formal town meeting vote. But I think Chris
Yeah, I think we. I
is
think
going to look talk to the planners and people like that and see.
Yeah, let's see. I mean,
Yep.
we don't need to reinvent a wheel here, but it's well worth our while to ask around and find out what are the different ways that towns have adopted a master plan, and particularly looking for towns that have in one way or another adopted a master plan and actually put it to good use.
Yeah, because of all my experience with the previous plan,
Yeah.
current plan, I'm acutely sensitive to that because that was, well, yeah, Dave.
Yep.
But it doesn't carry as much weight as. I remember, I think it was Megan talking about, was it Rhode Island, where the plans were required, and I don't know. I think maybe consistency of things you do be consistent, be tied to the plans. I think the state paid for them. Anyway, moving on.
Yep. Well, we'll be talking a lot more master plan over the coming weeks and months for sure.
Oh dear.
So if there's nothing else for tonight on the master plan, it's a good discussion. I'm glad. Do we have any bills? I don't think we had any, did I? I didn't see any bills,
so.
did I?
No.
They aren't even listed on my agenda, but there are meeting minutes, which I'll move to adopt, to approve with any corrections we may come up with.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the minutes of April 11th, 2022 be approved as drafted with any corrections noted during discussion. Is there any discussion?
I didn't see anything.
They look good to me. So with no further discussion, we'll put it to a vote. Justin,
Aye.
Bob,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu,
Aye.
and Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. The minutes are approved. Next agenda item is staff report.
Yep, so I have a select board meeting tomorrow night. I'll be going over the MBTA communities, our master plan update, and the hazard mitigation plan as well, which we discussed at this last meeting. So those are my three items for that. I've primarily been preparing for those kind of discussion items. And we're going to continue to work on those, doing some of the background work for the office. So we've been appreciative of the light agendas, able to dig into some of the long-awaited other stuff. So that's it for now.
That's it?
Yep.
Anything in the correspondence that caught anybody's eye? Other than the one we noted earlier, the SHI update, that was just a cover letter, and the staff will be reviewing the data and submitting that back to DHCD as necessary.
Yeah, I can touch on that just briefly. So yeah, that was received today. I haven't had a chance to go through the SHI. We do have an app request for new units pending, so I'll have to look at in terms of the date that they updated to, that they provided for us. Yeah, it's an annual. They send this each year, and we take a look at it to make sure that we are in agreement. So I'll be reviewing that and providing any edits back to them. I'll circulate. I'm not sure why the other page didn't get through, but I will circulate that as well. And if there's any edits that any members of the public or the board notices, I'm happy to include them.
Yeah, I want to make sure that's a good point. I'll make, because I had gathered up some data. I had mentioned earlier I've been gathering up some 40B data. I'll double check to make sure that the new SHI information matches up, or if I see anything wrong in the new anything I think is wrong with the new SHI information, I'll let you know.
I always appreciate the second set of eyes. I try to be diligent, but you never know.
Alrighty. Any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC? Seeing none, are there any other items which may lawfully come before the board? We're not going to get to vote on item 7 here, I don't think.
Oh.
No, well, we could vote on it.
I told Bill we'd be here till midnight.
No, we just extend the deadline. We don't have to wait.
Yeah, we don't actually have
Get
to go.
to the
We just
deadline.
have to allow the meeting to go past.
On the other hand, I move that we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. Justin,
Aye.
Bob,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu,
Aye.
and Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned.